So this operation of this conscience is very simple, and all you really need to do is exercise a sincere, and this is the tricky part, a sincere desire to know God's truth on whatever the subject is. Now, some answers are so difficult for God to share because our development precludes us from receiving an answer. So an example of that is, let's say you wanted to know what the structure of the universe was. It's a valid question, right? Humans have been trying to discover that for centuries, right? Millennia, actually. And so let's say you wanted to know. Now, God can share that with you, but you need a certain amount of development in love because the universe is structured around love. You need a certain amount of development in love to understand it. And the trouble is, to understand it more, you need more love. And when I say the trouble is, it means that the less love you actually have, the harder it's going to be to understand the answers. So God also tries to share the truth with you commensurate or in balance with how much love you have. So a simple thing like this is possible. Remember on Friday we had the question, we started with the question, does God exist or is God real? Well, we can ask God whether God exists. But I need a certain amount of openness in my soul to receive the answer, don't I? Right? Because my soul, as we pointed out Saturday, has a whole set of emotions. And in those emotions, if I've got an emotion, if I don't want there to be a God, then it's going to be very hard for God to say, yes, I exist to you, because emotionally you're going to be going, oh, but I don't want him to exist. So this is what I mean by a sincere desire. It has to be a real, pure desire to know, not one that's like, I want to ask because it will prove my idea right. You understand the difference? We're not asking so that we can prove that we're right. We're asking what is right, which is a very different thing. Many of us, when we ask questions, and you've even noticed that perhaps in this conversation we've had with you the last 3 days, many of you, when you ask questions, you're asking a question because you want to prove you're right. And that's not a question. That's not a sincere question. A sincere question is, what is right? I want to know what is right. So developing sincerity is the key to the receiving answers through the operation of the conscience. As soon as you develop a proper sincerity, you will receive instant answers on any subject, as long as you have the proper level of sincerity about that subject. All right? And it doesn't matter what subject, like I said, science or otherwise. Now, of course, if you don't have a certain level of development to understand the subject, then of course there's going to be a limited amount of information that can be shared. So let's say you're asking a question that's about, has a complex physics answer, and you've had no experience of physics your entire life, then it would make sense that there's a limited amount of information God can share with you on that subject, particularly if you're not in the development of love where you're open enough to understand complicated physics. You follow? So there are limitations on the operation of the conscience that we ourselves put on it. From God's perspective, God wants to share everything. Our capacity, just like any child who's developing, our capacity to receive the answer is going to be different depending on our development. So it's like, if you imagine like a 2-year-old asks questions about, if they can speak by now, right? And they ask a question like, where did I come from? Now, the answer you would give the 2-year-old as to where they came from would have to be a lot more simple, wouldn't it? Because of the development of their brain and their development of their ideas and their understanding of language. is going to be a very different answer. You could give them the fundamental basics of an answer, like out of mum's tummy might be an answer, and you might give in that place. But, then you could say, but your soul, and if you could explain what a soul is, you might have to get it out on a picture on the diagram and you might have to say, here's your bodies and draw pictures and here's what your soul is. That soul came from God. So you could explain all that to a 2 or 3 year old, you could, but you'd have to do it in a very, very basic manner, wouldn't you? In terms of the language they have and the development they have and their understanding. Now, when that 2 year old is now 14 years old, can you see, you can share a lot more information about it, can't you now, with them? Because by now they've learned about sexual organs and they've learned about how you can be a lot more complicated. Oh, this particular body, the physical one, came from this process. This spirit body came from this process, and still the soul came from this process. And you can share more information because the development of the child is greater, and therefore the child is able to receive that information. So you can see, as a parent, you can share information, but you have to sort of wait to a degree for the development of the child, for the child to understand the information you're sharing. And God does the same thing with you. So God can't share with you things that God knows are way beyond your capacity to understand. He can only share with you the things that you have a sincere desire to know and that are within the limits of your capacity to understand. Everyone get that? So it's important to know that's a limitation, you could say, of not the conscience mechanism, but it's a limitation of our development. And when I say development, I mean not only our development in love or truth or any of those qualities, but also our maturity, our development in terms of our lifespan and our development in terms of our experience. All of those things are a part of our development.